Well, coasters, it's Bruce here, and hey, I'm in Ash Vegas today, or Ashburton, and I've caught up with someone I haven't seen for many years, Graham East, and Graham East is well known to all of our coast members. Hokitika Motels, salmon farms, Western District Council, or whatever it was called, Borough Council in those days, was it, Graham?
Hokitika Borough Council.
Yeah, Graham, thank you so much, first of all, for allowing me to come over and sit down and share a few of your stories
You're welcome, Bruce.
with our members.
Real good to see you.
Oh, no, it's great. And I don't know about the weather. Is it always like this over here?
No, we put it on especially for you today.
Oh, that's awesome.
Make you feel at home.
She's blowing, isn't it?
There's strong wind out there. As I said, my cousin come up from Ranfurly and he said there was camper vans that really should have been off the road.
Oh, and I noticed every truck I went past, you get through the other side and whack, and then you get the wind and the...
Yes.
You know, she was good. Mm. Now, Graham, what's your full name?
Graham East. No middle name, just Graham.
No point in wasting it, is it?
No.
Whereabouts were you born?
Greymouth.
Oh.
Yes.
A lot of us...
The East family were in Cobden.
Right.
My grandparents were in Cobden. And there's a photo up there behind you on the wall with all the family and etc. Anyway.
Yeah, so you were born in McBrearty Ward, I suppose? In Grey Hospital?
I don't know, in Greymouth somewhere. And I was only a little fellow, and my father took a position in the railways in Hokitika.
Yeah.
And they moved to Hokitika.
Oh, they're lost in our gain, I reckon. Hey, who were your mum and dad?
Albert Leonard,
yeah,
and Ruby Florence. And Ruby was a Bond, but brought up by the Richardson family in Greymouth because her parents died when she was young.
Oh, wow.
Mm.
And so what did your dad do?
My father was at the end of the day, he was the manager of the road services in Hokitika, which I don't know whether you remember when they had trucks and buses going north and south all over the place. They had branches all around New Zealand, the road services.
I remember in the 70s where we used to pick our parcels up in the building on the corner.
At the big building opposite the town clock in Wells Street.
Where was your first home? In
My
Greymouth?
first home was in Hokitika.
Ah.
Being 1 year old, you see.
Yeah.
And they lived...
Can you remember where it was?
Davy Street.
Is it still there?
No, sorry. Britain Street, 19 Britain Street, between Weld and the Quay.
Yeah.
And there was a big old home. There was a big passage down the middle. We used to play cricket in the passage. That's how big.
I know. I remember those things.
Of course, there was 8 of us kids.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's how many of you are left?
Good question. Me, my brother Des, sister Alison, my brother Neville in Brisbane, and myself. 5 out of 8.
Ron.
Sorry, Ron. Ron is still alive too. Thanks, Terry.
Yeah. That's good
Not
numbers.
Too bad.
That's good numbers.
Mm.
Wow. So the house in Britain Street, you go along by Cass Square, turn a righty into. Oh, I know where it is.
Yes.
And is it still there?
I don't know, Bruce.
Yeah. What did you do as you were growing up as a youngster? What did you do for fun? What did your family do?
We were lucky in Hokitika in that we could go anywhere and not be worried about being molested or bashed or anything like that. We used to go fishing down at the river, and there was a big structure that the fishing boats used to tie up onto in the Hokitika River.
Where was that, Graham?
Right up to the dairy factory outlet in Britain Street.
Yeah.
The piles, and on the piles they had a big, about 250, 10 inches square beam, and we used to walk along there. And at low tide we used to catch flounder, and when the tide was in we would have anything from kahawai to sea run trout to herring.
Oh, wow.
We used to go up to the tailings, dredge tailings in those days, and just fossick around. We used to get freshwater crabs in the stones and the creeks.
Great days, weren't they?
We used to go rabbit shooting up in the back blocks, and good days, Bruce.
And Mum would be, you'd leave, I guess, when the sun came up, and as long as you're home by dark, Mum didn't mind.
Well, pretty much Hokitika, everybody knew everybody. Pretty much the same today.
Yeah.
And yes, and I think if you got off the beaten track, somebody would put you back on the beaten track.
Pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Did you go blackberry?
We had blackberries. In those days, everybody had a quarter acre in Hokitika.
Yeah.
Because that's so.
Don't forget mushrooms, Graham, over
Blackberries and mushrooms.
the Hokitika golf course where Graham.
Yeah, good point too.
Well,
So-
in those days, everybody had a quarter acre section because in Hokitika there was no sewerage in those days,
Right.
and everybody had to have a quarter acre to get rid of their own effluent in their own lot. And so we had blackberries, blackcurrants, vegetables, you name it, virtually our own garden supplies.
All on your section.
Yeah,
Oh, that's fantastic.
chooks for heads.
Yep.
Yeah.
And mushrooms.
We didn't have mushrooms on the section, but
Out the golf
as
course.
my cousin reminded me, over the golf course and a few other little places, used to go and pick fresh mushrooms in season. Yeah.
Well, I've had a wander around it. I can't find them, Graham.
Ah,
I know 10 years ago they were there.
we didn't take them all.
No, that's what it would have been. Well, did you have a nickname when you were growing up?
I used to have ginger hair when
Yeah.
I was a young fella, and I remember the name Rusty occasionally, but that seemed to have dropped off. We went to Kaitaia when I was 16.
Yep.
I was only a year in my apprenticeship carpentry, and I lost contact with quite a few people because we were there for 4 years. My father went up there as manager of the road services.
Oh, yeah.
He couldn't be manager in Hokitika because I can't remember who it was there, but he wouldn't move and wouldn't shift on. And so Dad decided he'd go to Kaitaia, and 4 years later, this guy died, and Dad got the manager's job back in Hokitika.
You came back.
Anyway, yeah.
Where did you attend primary school?
Hokitika?
And can you remember the school? 'Cause
Yes, I remember the school, Bruce. Off Hamlin Street, there was a long drive in to the main high school.
Yeah.
The primary school was across the road on the east side of Sale Street. The main high school, of course, it's not there anymore. It's gone a long time ago.
At primary school? Were you a bit of a book reader?
No, Bruce, I've never been a book reader. All my life, I've always been an outdoors person, wanting to be doing something, going somewhere.
Doing practical things.
Pretty much.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
Even today.
So, what about teachers? Can you remember any of the teachers from primary school?
I can't remember the ones from primary school, but I remember most of the ones from, well, when you say primary, I think it was the high school mostly.
Yeah. So, you went to the high school, and you went to, wasn't Westland High then, was it? What was it called?
Hokitika District High School.
Okay. And you remember any of the teachers from there?
Pretty much all of them.
Wow. Well, you're doing well. So you must have been one of the good guys.
No. I had a thing with the teachers. You keep out of my road and I'll keep out of your road.
Respect. It's got to be a good
That's
thing.
what I was told by one of them.
Yeah. Isn't that awesome?
So I was pretty good at athletics. And I have still got the West Coast Interschools record for 800 yards. And it's 80 metres now,
Yeah.
which is pretty much the same thing, but not the same thing. So,
So-
my record still stands.
And it'll never be changed because we've changed current.
Changed the metric.
We've changed it around.
Yeah,
What was your favourite subject at school?
probably maths.
And you're good at it?
I think that carried me through. After my apprenticeship, I started working on my own,
Yeah.
and I went and saw Bill Guthbert, the accountant in Hokitika,
I remember Bill.
and asked him if he would do the books for me as regards to taxation.
Yeah.
And the first thing he said was no. And I sort of knocked me back a bit. And he said, but hang on a minute, he said, a lot of people put their receipts, their checkbooks and everything into a box and bring it to me 3 months after the end of the financial year and expect me to do the books for them. He said, now, if you bring the books in, what I want, every 2 months, we will consider doing them. I said, Bill, you got it, I will do that. And so he actually set me up, and he set me up with cash flow charts, budgets, and I did the whole lot myself at home, basically from his instructions.
Yep.
But because I was reasonably good at maths at school, I think that carried me through.
You're a very astute man, isn't he? Or was?
Yes.
He's very astute.
Yes.
So you're obviously into sports, and at high school, which sports did you play?
Rugby, cricket. I built the squash courts in Hokitika, so it was another sport that I was pretty fond of. And it was good because we could go and have a game of squash wet days or whatever.
How did you manage to put that together? Because it was a lot of money back then, wasn't it?
I can tell you the one person who I think was the mainstay in us building the squash courts was Eric Walker.
Yep.
Eric was the president, if you can call the president of those days, of the tennis club. And the tennis club was close to going defunct. And so when we talked to Eric about putting squash courts there, he was very keen, but it was on the basis that we would never let the tennis courts go. We were to keep them going.
Right.
And we agreed. And so I believe the tennis courts are still going.
Yeah, they're still there.
And of course the squash court is still going. And we had voluntary labour. John Olsen come round to my place one Sunday morning after a night out, we won't go there, and said, come on East, we're going to build a squash court. So that's where it started. And poor old John's not with us anymore, but yes, John started it off and Eric got involved. Eric was involved with all sorts of sports.
Oh, he
used to take me for training athletics after he knocked off work at Cass Square.
Yep.
And so I put my success in athletics down to the training that Eric provided, free to everybody and anybody.
And look, he was a force when it came to tennis.
Yes.
He was a force when it came to badminton.
Yes.
You know, anybody that he trained, they were really hard to beat.
Yes.
Which was always a bit of a problem.
Well, I think he encouraged a lot of people who may have given it away to keep going.
So how would back at high school, how would one of your mates have described you? Were you quiet? Were you rowdy? Were you, how would they have described you?
I don't know whether I want to go there.
Well,
I think probably quiet. I was not a good academic student. With 8 children at home, Mum and Dad did not have the wherewithal to spend a lot of time with us at home.
Yep.
And so we did not get into homework like a family with only 2 or 3 children would have had time to do.
Yeah, 10 and mine.
And I'm not blaming my parents,
Yeah.
but it's just a fact of life that we had to fend for ourselves.
Well, there's some good people come out of big families. By James there is.
Sure.
Now, look, as a kid, what do you want to be when you grew up?
When I was at school,
Yeah.
one day Joe Bennett, who's Bennett and Goodfellow Builders in Hokitika, come up to the school and said to the principal, I'm trying to remember what he said, but it was words like, who is your best carpentry student or woodwork? And I think the school teacher of the time probably was one of the ones that would prefer me to be out of his way, and so he said, Easters.
Yeah, that Easter's pretty good.
So that day I agreed to be an apprentice carpenter joiner.
Right. And what was the name of the company?
Goodfellow and Bennett.
I don't remember that one.
It was
Well,
Percy Goodfellow
Yeah.
and Joe Bennett used to live out Canary Road.
Good guys?
They were really good guys. I was telling somebody, my grandson the other day, I have still got the tools that they brought me. The owner of the business in those days had to buy the tools
Yeah.
and take the money out of your pay every week a little bit
Yeah.
to pay for them. And they brought me really good American tools. How they were available in those days, I don't know. But the saws, the hand saws, were Henry Diston, the best known saw makers in the world as far as I could recall.
That would take that'd take a bit of finding stuff like that back then, wouldn't it?
Well, one day recently, I said to somebody who was using a chainsaw as a carpenter, and I said, well, back in my day, we had rip saws. And he said to me, like, what is a rip saw? And I said, for ripping down the length of a piece of timber, you have a crosscut saw for cutting across the grain,
Yep.
and you had a rip saw, hand rip saw for ripping down the grain, whereas you put it through power saws now. Well, we didn't ever have any power saws. There was no electric drills, no battery drills. It was all done by hand.
Incredible, isn't it? That's
Well,
incredible.
Yeah.
So you decided to take up an apprenticeship. What did you do then? So how long were you an apprentice with the?
It was 10,000 hours,
How many?
10,000 hours, which equated to 5 years at 40 hours a week.
Yep.
On the basis that when I went to Kaitaia, I decided I was not going to be not unlike my father, but different in that I didn't want to work from payday to payday. I wanted to do something and be somebody and go somewhere. And so I worked as much overtime as I could do.
Yep.
And I finished my apprenticeship in 3.5 years instead of 5.
And that was because of the number of hours that you'd done.
Exams that I did
Yep.
and got, and the overtime that I did, cut it down to 3.5 years.
Wow. After leaving the apprenticeship, what did you do then? When you left Benjamin's?
I finished my apprenticeship in Kaitaia.
Yeah.
When my father got transferred up there. It was a big company, Worth and Weber, and they had something like 45, 50 staff and their own joinery factory. And so I was lucky enough to spend half of my apprenticeship in the joinery factory. We used to make wooden doors and wooden windows and you name it, wooden, we made it.
That would have put you a long way ahead of most.
It did.
Yeah.
And so when my father got shifted back to Hokitika, I finished my apprenticeship in Kaitaia and then went back to Hokitika, and I started working with Kevin Houseman, who was a builder in those days. And Kevin was very good to me. He lived in Canary Road. There was a family of Housemans out Canary Road. And it got to the stage where different people were asking me to do small jobs on the weekend. And so I started doing this, and I got that many of them that I had to say to Kevin one day, Kevin, I've got more work than I can cope with.
Yep.
I'd like to start working on my own. And I said, no disrespect or anything like that, but I'm going to give it a go. And that's where I started.
And did you start as Graham East Builders or
As just
Graham
Graham
East
East builder.
And what did you build around Hokitika?
In those days, I did state advance housing maintenance.
Yep.
There was quite a few state houses in Hokitika.
Yeah.
I did maintenance on the government buildings, and that was full of government departments in those days.
So like the Seddon House?
Yes.
Oh.
And with the old lather and plaster walls, that was a real challenge.
Well, Graham, they're still in good nick.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
And I used to do little jobs, concrete driveways, concrete paths, and those sort of things.
Yeah.
And slowly but surely I got labour to work with me because I had so much work. and I don't know where you want to start and finish with that one.
Well, I'm wondering, are there any buildings, any houses around town that you built, or was it mainly maintenance?
Well, buildings around town, I did quite a lot of work for the Preston Bakery family.
Yep.
I built the Anglican manse, which is not there anymore. They've pulled it down, and
Yep.
service station gone up there. There's quite a few houses I built. I built the mobile service station in Ross.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we used to travel, you name it, we would build it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, at what point did you decide? You got involved in local politics, didn't you?
That was later in life, after I'd been through JC's, which I've always said JC's was a great organisation for any young person. I believe it was about 18 to 20 something was the age group that they put people through.
Yeah.
And it was all about teaching people how to do things correctly, how to run a meeting, how to run a project. And I learnt a lot from JC's, and it was after my time in JC's that there was 2 or 3 of us decided we would have a go at being on the local borough council. We weren't quite happy with some of the old ladies that were on the council at the time, and of course the young people are probably saying that about us now, but that's life.
And so you'd have been on in JC's when 802 was there, Jack Sagru.
Yes.
And I interviewed Rosalie recently.
Oh, good.
And it was a really good interview.
Yes, there was a lot of guys. I'd have to sit down and think about the ones who were. I ended up being president of the JCs before I finished up there, as quite a few people did, of course.
I recall Rosalie saying that you couldn't go past 40 years old in JCs, and when you got to the point where they made you retire, you got something which was upside down and had its legs poked up in the air. And it was time for you to leave.
I don't really remember that bit, but basically it was 18 to 25, and then they had like a senior JCs,
Okay.
a group that would go on until 40, but I didn't get involved with that.
So it was different to Rotary, wasn't it?
Yes.
And different to Lions.
And different alliance. Yes, it was mainly in helping young people learn, as I say, about running a meeting properly,
Yep.
running a project properly, how to budget a project, that sort of thing. So
So
it was a great start and great help for me.
So on the borough council, who was the mayor in those days?
Jack Richards, I think,
Okay. Oh, yeah. See,
and Winston Reynolds was at the same before or after.
yeah, I think you're probably after.
And those gentlemen, with respect for them, had never had any training in meeting procedure.
Yep.
And of course we had, there was John White and a few others of us had been through JCs and had meeting procedure drummed into us, and you do this and you don't do that, blah, blah. And of course those gentlemen had never had any meeting procedure, and it was pretty chronic. The first few meetings, I have to tell you, it was,
You'd have tidied it up though. You know,
it took a while, and we had to be careful because you can't change those
Yeah.
sort of things overnight.
And what were the challenges back then, Graham, with the borough council?
On the borough council, the airport is one that comes to mind, which you all know all about.
Yep.
And I was actually chairman of the airport committee, but we didn't get into the airport project that you were involved with, putting lights in and extending everything.
Yep.
Sewerage was the biggest one, and I was one of the ones who pushed for sewerage in Hokitika. In those days we had a flooding problem in the town, and we had to apply through the health department and the Ministry of Works to get approval for any loans. And to get a loan for the sewerage, we had to assure those people that we would also do the stormwater problem at the same time,
Right.
or beforehand.
Yeah.
And so quite a few people in town thought I was pushing to get the loan for the sewerage because I owned a block of land. I was just started building the first couple of motels in those days, and so I actually got voted out of the council after my second term because I was pushing for the sewerage.
That's the nature of politics, isn't it?
Unfortunately,
Yep.
when I went back years and years afterwards, a lot of old people said, thank goodness you and a few of the others pushed for sewerage then. They would hate to think what it would have cost
Ah.
10 years later.
What did it cost?
I can't remember.
Was it $1
Bruce.
million? Someone said they had to borrow $1 million, and
I can't remember.
people were horrified at the time. And
Yes, people said, well, you couldn't afford it.
oh,
But you see, as I said before, everybody had to have a quarter acre to live on to get rid of their own effluent
Yeah.
with soak pits.
yeah.
And they didn't last forever. They had to be cleaned out every now and again. And
Was it?
the sewerage, without the sewerage scheme, Hokitika could not expand. You could not build more than one residence on one section.
Yep.
You couldn't have 3 or 4 flats. You couldn't have motels. You couldn't have hotels
Oh, yeah, no, it's been
because of it. But a lot of people in town were so short-sighted, they couldn't see that.
Yeah, no, nothing's changed.
And I can tell you now that I got on great with Ethel Robbins. He was a really marvellous man.
Yeah,
He was a town clerk. And one thing that I had to do, I was chairman of Works Committee on the council at the time, and it probably was another reason why some people didn't like the idea that being a councillor, chairman of Works, and I was pushing for sewerage
Yep.
because I was starting the motel block. Anyway, I was just about going to get off the track there. With the sewerage going through town, a lot of people complained because work in their street regarding footpaths on the road was not getting done. And unfortunately, we could not tell them because between the town clerk and myself and the mayor, the council didn't even know the full facts of the matter.
Yep.
Was that when you're doing footpaths and associated works, it had to come out of rates. We got it all done through the subsidies on the sewerage.
Oh, I love it. Oh goodness! Oh, there's another one.
I can say that now, but I could not go to the press or anybody
And
in
tell them
those days and tell them the full truth. Have got chopped off.
And so you're on Borough Council, you're on JC's, Hokitika Motels, ahead of its time, wasn't it?
First ones in town.
Yeah, well ahead of its time. And that beautiful big 2-storey house, that was massive.
Yeah.
It of course it's all been demolished these days. There was a fire there, and I understand that someone else is going to build something there.
Well, that's life, Bruce.
That's how it goes.
Yeah.
The tourism sector back then was nothing like it turned out to be, was it?
Well, of course, the road, South Road, only went to Paringa in those days, and the Hearts Road opened at Christmas 1965, and that was when I finished the first 2 units. We lived in one and we let one. It was the opening of the Hearts Pass Road in December 1965.
65, yes.
Yeah.
Did you go to the opening?
No, I was just building and the motels and blah blah.
And did that make a big difference to tourism?
Well, it certainly did. The only little thing is that people in those days used to travel through Hokitika and go down to the glaciers, stay 2 or 3 nights and come back to Hokitika. So we got them twice. So we needed twice as many people going through than we used to have to make up the same numbers.
I can understand that. Yeah. Well, it's certainly interesting, isn't it? Tell me, how old were you when you decided to retire?
When I retired, eventually it was because Val got motor neurons disease.
Yep.
I was 47. That was 1986. So I finished up with the building business and sold the motels, and we moved to Christchurch for Val's sake.
Yep.
Not because I particularly wanted to, but for Val's sake, and we could do more things with her in the weather and take her places while she was still alive. It was a terminal thing, you see.
How old were you when you first started dating?
26.
20s. You must have been busy up to then. Do you remember your first date with Val?
Not my first date as such. I had a few, but I never had a steady girlfriend.
Right.
Val was the first friend,
Yep.
and Val used to do the phones for Colin and Claire Grockett with the taxis. And in those days, the Hokitika Review Society needed volunteers, and I was a backstage volunteer being a builder.
Yeah.
And so I did that for several years with Colin Grockett. And I used to go back to their place after we'd had practice and so forth, and here Val was still answering the phone for them, and I got to know Val pretty good.
Yeah.
And so we got on pretty good and got together.
How many kids did you have?
2, Sue and Alan.
Awesome. The it's how many years were you married to Val before she passed away? Must have been a limited number, wasn't it?
It was 1963, 26. Well, I was 26 when I got married,
Yep.
and I retired when I was 47.
47, 21 years. Yeah. What did you most admire about her?
About Val?
Yeah.
Val was really happy for me to do the business side of things. She did not want to know the bank manager or anything. Val was happy to be half of the team, and Val was keen to look after the cleaning ladies, getting bits and pieces, ordering stuff.
Yep.
But the business side of it, she was more than happy to leave to me.
Providing the
And
support.
so that was a real good thing, because I didn't have to say, Val, what do you think about us building another unit or two, or borrowing another X number of dollars? We're always in debt, of course, until we finished.
Yeah, well, you can't build things without it. Did you, Graham? Did you meet your grandparents?
I knew my grandparents well. There's a photo of them on the photo behind you on the wall there. And we used to go up to Cobden. They lived in Cobden, of course.
Yeah.
And there were 8 in their family as well. And my grandfather was what they call a wheel tapper in the railways. He, apart from other bits and pieces, he used to go around and tap the wheels of all the trains to make sure that they were sound and didn't have any. If there was a crack in the wheel, it's like a cracked cup. It didn't
it's
have
got a
the
different
same
sound?
ring. And so he was known as a wheel tapper.
Right.
Right.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
It was a
And we used to-
full-time job.
Yes. We used to go to Greymouth for a holiday for 1 week at Christmas, and that was our annual holiday, to go to Cobden
Yep.
for 1 week.
And so grandparents on the other side?
Mum's parents had died when she was younger,
Yeah.
and she was brought up by the Richardson family in Greymouth. And yes, I did know them, and yes, we did go and stay with them occasionally. But I guess, like a lot of families, they get involved more with one side than the other.
Of course.
Just one of those things.
It's how it works.
Yes.
What do you consider is the most important invention that you've seen since you started school and moved on? What's the thing that's come along that's changed everything going forward?
Mate, there's so many things.
Yeah, if
there
you
are
had to
so
pick 2 or
many
3,
things.
what would you pick?
Well, look, the likes of building. Let's start with building.
Yep.
I did a little document when I was a builder, and there was no such thing as concrete floors. They were all wooden piles going through to, we did everything in the house. Today, a contractor does the foundations, another
Yep.
concrete another contractor does the floor,
Yeah.
another contractor does the framing, another contractor. We did the whole lot. And so that's been huge changes in the building industry.
What about cars?
As far as cars go,
What was your first car?
my first car was a Vauxhall Velox 6-cylinder.
Oh, they were
And-
fantastic.
It was a nice big car,
Yeah.
and I looked after it like it was my own baby. And of course, but things have changed. Shortly after that, I had what they called the twin spinner Ford. They brought out a single spinner, which in the front of the grille was a single spinner about that round piece, about that big.
Yeah.
And that was the 49er Ford. And I had the 52 Ford, which had two of those. It was called the twin spinner.
One on each
One
card
on each
or
side, one on each side
each
in the
side?
front.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Inside the headlights.
Yeah.
And so that was called a Ford twin spinner. And that was a whole 100 horsepower, which was 75 kilowatt. Now today, I drive a Maserati
Yeah.
with a twin turbo motor in it. And
How many horsepower?
I won't go there, Bruce.
Things have changed, haven't they?
Things have changed in the automotive industry, something unreal. Bicycles in those days, there was no gears on bicycles in those days. They were just a fixed
Yeah.
spindle. And now you're talking about 21, 24 speed and electric bikes.
Did you always have a fridge at home? When you were...
Now, there was no such thing as a fridge when we were young. There was a safe on the south wall of the house on the outside with a gauze door for ventilation.
Right.
And all the milk and meat and everything was kept in that safe on the south side of the house because that was the coolest place.
So how long did the meat last?
Well, with 8 kids and 2 parents, so it didn't have to last very long.
There'd be nothing wasted, would there?
But I said to somebody just recently, when we were old enough to do jobs around the village and work for somebody after school, we used to help Reg Cox. Used to have the milk run in those days.
Yeah.
Cart the milk round. There was no bottle of milk in the shops. And so Reg had a little old ute, I couldn't tell you what it was. Gareth Cox is still alive. He's in Darfield. He's a real estate agent.
Yeah.
He would tell you all about that. But anyway, Reg had this little sawn-off ute truck, and he used to have the drums of milk and drums of can on the back, and people used to put out their jugs or their bottles in their letterboxes, and they'd put coupons out or they'd put money out for the milk or the cream, and we used to have to go and pick up the container, take it back to the truck, dip it with a 1 pint of milk and put it in the jug
And then put it back.
and put it back in the box. Now in those days in the hot weather, if people were at work, I can't remember how long it lasted, but this is fresh milk from the cows straight out of the can, Bruce. And just a little highlight of our young days. Yeah.
And so, do you remember when your mum bought the first fridge?
No.
TV?
There was no TVs in Hokitika. When I built the first motel in 1965,
Yeah.
we did not have TV in Hokitika run from a New Zealand aerial. There was Russell Eager, who was an electrician and had a little electrical shop in the middle of town.
Yep.
He put an aerial up down at the wharf in Hokitika, and some of the locals, the first ones, used to get TV from Australia in the evening better than we could get TV from the so-called supply in Wellington.
Oh, I love it.
And,
I love it.
When I built the first motel, there was no TV, but I put the wires in the wall for when it would come. And it was only about a year later, and we had one of the first TVs, and the TV was run by a cable from the TV across to your chair with a little gizmo, and you used to with a cable across to the TV.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was the thing that changed your channel, or
Yes.
made the volume
And
go
the
up?
volume in the channel, yeah.
Wow.
Well, we didn't have many channels. You can count them on the thumbs.
Yeah, that's it. So, What's different? You know, you look at the young ones out there now. What's different for them than from when you were growing up?
There doesn't seem to be the respect and discipline in a lot. I'm not saying all, but the respect and discipline has certainly changed dramatically. When we were young, if we were on a bus or anywhere and an older person came in, we had to stand and let them have the seat.
True.
It does not happen today.
Do you think that's a reflection of, well, what is a reflection of?
I think it's a reflection on the parents, maybe both parents working long hours, and they don't have time to spend with their family, the same as our parents did. I don't know that I could pinpoint that one, Bruce. Standards. A lot of business people today are not like the business people of my day. In the old papers in those days, I found quite a few old papers in old buildings I either demolished or did up with weatherboards or whatever. And you would have adverts in the paper: we guarantee our services, we guarantee our prices, we guarantee you will be happy and satisfied. Do you ever see that today?
No, you couldn't do that now, could you? Because it's pretty hard.
That's right. Even workers, I don't think there's the loyalty with workers today that there was in those days. Maybe there's more opportunity today for people to go in somewhere else, change their job, and maybe do better, which is what they'd want to do anyway. But in those days, employment was limited, and I think that's probably why people stayed with their employer longer and had a little bit more loyalty and respect.
And when we were growing up, Graham, Mum was always at home.
Yes.
And now Mum can't stay at home because, you know, the mortgage is bigger, the pressures are bigger all round.
Yes.
And that takes away that supervision thing, doesn't it?
I believe that's right.
It's
a lot of kids go home now to an empty home.
Yep.
And they've got to fend for themselves. And so they end up on phones or tablets, and you've read as much as I have that a lot of those kids are going to end up with problems. We won't go there, I don't know enough about it.
Yeah, there'll be problems, right? You've done a lot of travelling.
Yes.
What's the place that you've been to where you went, wow, this is fantastic?
Hokitika.
Oh, come on.
Hokitika, home, Bruce.
Oh, coasters, he's following the script here.
I will always be a coaster. It was really great for Val and I and the kids to start a business, start a family, and I will never forget that. I have been to a lot of places around the world, you're right.
Yep.
And I always look forward to coming home.
Coming across that Arthur's Pass, and you wind the window down, and the green trees, and then the smell hits you, and you think, this is just awesome. I know that feeling.
Yeah.
But outside of that, have you been to a place that was stunning?
Everywhere you go is nice, in my opinion, for some other reason. And they all have something that is attractive and nice, and you appreciate it, but they're all different. You go to Alaska and they've got the glaciers and the mountains up there, like in Canada. You go to Japan and they've got a lot of things there. Their culture I like. You can go to UK, Wales, Scotland, Ireland, and that is a little bit more homely for us, I guess, because that's where our families originated from. And they've got a lot of place names and things that are common with our culture and the way we live.
That you kind of relate to.
Yeah, but I've been all around America lots of times, and one thing I would like to say is 95% of all the people in the world are lovely people. Doesn't matter where you go.
Yep.
So they make you feel welcome. They will help you.
It's pretty neat, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
And so a lot of that is just like home.
Well, you've certainly, I've always known that you were very, very widely travelled, and that changes your perspective on life as well, because you see things that the rest of us don't see.
Val died at 53.
Yeah.
And after that, I thought, Graham, you could go back and start building again, or you could do something else again. And I thought, well, maybe that's kept me alive. Val's passing kept me alive. It stopped me working 7 days a week.
Yep.
And got me to see there's more in life than working 7 days a week. Obviously, you need some income, but
I think probably a good lesson in life for all of us there.
I think so.
Yeah, yeah. And look, it comes on to my next note here. What are some of the most important lessons that you've learned that you could convey to? Because a lot of people will watch these videos and interviews, and what are some of the things that you've learned that you could pass on, or people can listen or not listen? Makes no difference.
One of my favourite sayings I tell my children, my grandchildren, and anybody else who will listen is, what will be is up to me. Don't blame God or your father or your family or your friends. You have got to be responsible for everything you do.
What will be is up to me.
Yes.
I love it.
Well, you can put your own words to that.
Yeah, of course.
But basically, that is saying you have got to be responsible for what you say and what you do.
So if there was Graham, a turning point in your life, would it be Val's passing, or would it be?
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Everything changed.
Yes. Well, Bruce, I did think long and hard about what I would do, because, as I said before, we moved to Christchurch for Val's sake, really.
Yeah.
So I could take her places. We could go to the theatre and things like that weren't available in Hokitika.
Yep.
And we did go back quite often, but that was the main reason for going. But as I said, Val's passing made me rethink what is life all about. And I believed I had enough money from working 7 days a week in different businesses.
Yep.
And I didn't need to work again. So why not let somebody else take my place in the work field, create a job for somebody else, and get on and learn about other people and other countries and other cultures. And it's been an absolutely marvellous experience.
And you're still doing it.
Yeah, I am still doing it, Bruce.
Now tell me, one of the things that we hear on the coast and around New Zealand is that the level of entrepreneurs out there is not there as it used to be. When I was growing up, there was John White, there was you, there was salmon farms, there was all sorts of things. Tell me about the salmon farm. I mean, that was so far ahead of its time.
How many months have you got?
I just don't.
Well, I'll try and make it brief.
Oh, no. Look, I'm really... Because we're trying to get someone to get into the salmon industry right as we speak. We're trying again.
Okay. Well, good information. And I was taught by a real great guy, Jim Galloway. He was a Scotsman.
Yep. And
he was running the salmon farms for the government hatcheries in Canterbury.
Yeah.
And he decided one day that it would be a good idea if we could set a farm up commercially, instead of just the way they did it. They just grew the salmon to maturity and released the young fellas for salmon anglers.
Yep.
And generally the fishing industry.
So it's kind of fish and game, releasing them all around the place.
And so he could see that there was a commercial side to this and it should be looked at. And so he knew a guy, a keen salmon angler, John Whisker. And I got to know John well. He used to be in the forestry and go over to Hokitika frequently.
Right.
And I got to know him pretty well. And so they come to me and said, was I interested in having a look at it. And in those days, I'd finished the building business and was winding down other things. And I said, yeah, it sounds pretty good to me. Well, they said, we would like you to investigate where and what are the chances of doing this on the West Coast. They didn't specify any area. The first thing that come to my mind after that was you have to have your water supply coming in at a height that had to go through water tanks at the head of the raceways.
Yeah.
Then it had to go through the raceways. Then it had to go down into settling ponds before it ended up back in a river. So that's quite a drop. And if you try and think yourself, any river that you've walked up where you've got that situation without having to pump the water, I could not think of anywhere. So one day on a visit out to Lake Kaniere, I spied the dam going across Lake Kaniere that was put there by the Kaniere Electric Power Company a long time ago.
Yeah.
And that still operates the Kaniere Electric Power Scheme on the Kaniere River.
Certainly does.
So they put a dam across the river. It didn't stop the flow of the river, but what it did was backed up the water so that there was sufficient water to go down through a raceway down to the power station.
Yep.
And so when I saw this, and of course that was virtually level, only enough just for fall down to the power station. So I looked a bit further into this, and I believed I could put a dam in their water race, not the Kaniere River, because it was dropping away pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Put a dam in the power board race to divert water into the salmon farm, and that would give me just the elevation I needed to do all those things and get the water back safely into the Kaniere River.
Yeah.
That would also help with the angler's point of view that you did not want to delete the water and diminish the flow for fish to stop going up the river.
Yep.
And so there had to be a minimum amount of water going down the Kaniere River. And so I approached the Kaniere power station people, and they said, well, as long as it's limited and you don't interfere with the minimum flow we need when we're operating, then we think we could work with you on that one.
Do it.
So then I had 8 lots of people I had to get approval from, between the New Zealand Salmon Association, the South Island Salmon Committee, the local Salmon Committee, the Land Survey, the Borough Council, the County Council.
Jeez.
It went on. There was 8 lots of people I had to get approval from.
And you didn't have a Resource Management Act then either.
We didn't have anything at all. And so I did up some basic sketches of what Jim Galloway considered would be a good starting point.
Yeah.
And I went to each one of them and said, would you give us your approval to go ahead with this scheme? And every one of them said no. They would not give us a license for a salmon farm unless we had the land, so they could see where it was applicable to.
Yeah.
We couldn't get a water right unless we had a title for the land.
Yep.
We couldn't get something else because we didn't. So I went home, and this is a story I've told 100 times, Bruce. I went home after days out doing this, and I opened a bottle of whiskey, and had a couple of good whiskies, and I thought, Graham, what are we going to do? And it came to me. So I went down to John Olsen the next day. He was an engineer for Western County then, and said, John, would you give me approval in principle on the basis that I get approval for what he wanted?
Yeah.
And he thought about it, and he said, I can't see why not. And I said, would you put that in writing? And he said, yes. And I said, will you do it today or tomorrow? And he looked at me as much as to say, come on, East.
Give us a break,
So
Graham.
he did that.
Yeah.
So I got on my horse and I went round to the whole 8. Some of them I had to write to and said, would you do the same? At the end of the day, they all said yes. So I had the whole bloody lot of them in my bloody,
In the bag.
in the bag.
Yeah.
And I didn't have anything. I had no license, I had no land, I had no approvals, but I had approval in principle
Yep.
on the basis that I had the other ones. So they all agreed, yes.
And you got it all together.
And I got
Wow.
it all together. That's how I got it together.
And so when did you get the land?
From the land and survey, it was a block belonging to the government
Yep.
reserve out there, and it had to be done through the land and survey. And
So how'd it go? If someone was starting today, they really should talk to you.
well,
You know.
Bruce, I've got a lot of knowledge from back in those days and a lot of principles involved with the same thing. I think basically all the people I was involved with knew me.
Yeah.
They knew I had been a builder. I knew I was a motelier. They knew I had been on the borough council, and they knew one of the other things you asked me before about things is if you know my family or my friends, they will tell you I am no bullshit and no lies.
Yep.
And I tell my family that. No bullshit, no lies.
Yep.
And I think people knew me pretty much as that, and they could trust me to do what I was suggesting we wanted to do. Obviously there was opposition. The salmon fishermen didn't want a salmon farm there because they used the argument that if the salmon farm got underway, somebody would start up a trout farm, and that would be terrible, according to them.
How did that relate?
well, that was the way they're thinking.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I had battles on my hand. Fortunately, Harry Thompson and Seth Preston, 2 great guys for Hokitika and their families, they saw the whole picture of what I was talking about, and they said they would help me. And so I believe at the end of the day, you've got to sort out the channels of the right people, and you will know that with local bodies. You go to the right people. You don't go to the knockers.
No, you're going to go to the right
you
ones.
know from the council.
But it's been the same for years.
Yeah.
So
going on from there, I went out with John Olsen and 1 or 2 others, and we sorted out an area of land between the Kaniere River
Yep.
and the road going to Lake Kaniere.
Yep.
And I said, look, in there would be great. But it was scrub and bush up to 10 metres high. And I cut the whole area down with my chainsaw myself, personally myself.
Right.
I've got photos there I could show you of what I did. And I didn't, and it was only afterwards I got Ferguson Earth Moving in to bring in some truckloads of gravel to level it all off to put the concrete raceways on.
So, Graham, with a salmon farm, you grow them. Do you grow them from eggs?
We got the eggs and the milk
Yep.
from the 2 salmon farms in Kaniere.
On the the
The
Hiranui, is it?
Waimak and the Rakaia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you grow them, you feed them to a certain point.
Yes.
And what do you do then? Chuck them in the river?
Well, basically we wanted to grow, the first year we grew them up to approximately 8 inches,
Yeah.
because you've got so many predators in the river.
Yep.
Shags, bird life, other fish, eels that feed on small fish. And so we wanted to give them the best chance we could. So we grew them up to,
So it's quite
say, about 200 mils, 8 inches.
Size of
and
small
released
heron.
those as the first ones.
And so, can I just ask, did you release them from where the building is. Did
From
you
the
release
farm.
them from there?
Right from the farm. And they were down the river
Yeah.
and out to sea.
Right.
And 2 years later, the males come back as males and the females come back basically 3-year-old before they're mature.
And did they come back?
Yes,
They did.
we had the first male back in 2 years. After that, there were quite a few coming up the Hokitika River, and I've got figures I can show you there, a lot of information I have kept of the number of salmon that were reported by the Salmon Anglers Association in
Yep.
Hokitika,
Yep.
the Acclimatisation Society. They took records of that, and it's only that what they were told. I believe there were quite a few that they weren't told.
I reckon I've seen them go under the Hokitika Swing Bridge.
Yeah,
I reckon. Is it?
The first salmon released on the west coast was in the Hokitika and the Tiramacau in 1911.
Yep.
1911. How did they get the overland milk from Canterbury to the west coast in those days when the roads were gravel all the way through?
Yeah.
And anyway, that's another story. I've got information collected from the archives in the public library in Christchurch about that. And so following that though, we were releasing 500,000.
Each year.
Yeah. Once we got started and we got into it, we were releasing 500,000. So we couldn't keep them through to 200 mils because we didn't have the capacity to have 500,000. You start off with 600,000 eggs, and obviously you lose some. It's like people and animals.
Yep.
And so we were releasing something like 500,000, and they would go down the river. One of the problems I had, which really was a battle for us, was gold miners who were putting a lot of rubbish down the contributaries of the Kaniere River.
Yep.
And so I had to complain about that. I didn't like complaining about the people. They were basically good people like you and me. But when their dams got filled up, they used to accidentally
flush
let
them
it
out.
go and flush them out, and we all went down the river.
Would that kill the salmon? Would that kill a salmon?
It didn't help, especially when we were releasing, because you want a reasonably clear water for the salmon to orientate to know where to come back to. And if they were coming back and there was a lot of dirty water in the river, then it was not good for them coming back to find the farm. And so it had its sideline problems that we could do without.
And so when the fish come back up, what happens then? You collect them?
Well, I can tell you about this now, but I couldn't tell you going back to those days. I set up an electric barrier on the Kaniere River. I've got photos of it. I've got all the approvals.
Yeah.
Jim Galloway said, no way you'll ever get approval to put that on the Kaniere River East. He said, you won't get approval anywhere else. And I said, leave it to me, Jim, I'll suss it out. And so I got a generator from Christchurch. It just fitted on an 8x4 trailer, so it was a good sized generator. You will know.
Yeah.
We set it up on the opposite side of the Kaniere River to the farm, and basically you put an earth wire across at the gateway into the farm, across to the generator. You put a live wire up through standards across the other side, and you put aluminium droppers down into the water.
So when the fish come along,
when the water is you have to be careful because of the flow in the river. Sometimes the Kaniere River got very, very brackish with the runoff in the lake.
Yeah.
And you didn't want the rods being a metre short of the earth wire or a metre high. It had to be trying to be reasonably close to create an electric current. So when the salmon coming up the river, it was put in on an angle. They'd come up, they'd get a bit of a tingle, so they'd go across and straight into the farm.
so it didn't stun them. It was
No,
just to
no,
move
no.
them across.
It shuffled them into the farm.
Oh, I love it.
And yeah, still got all the approvals that we got for putting that electric barrier up there.
And did you get to the point of processing salmon?
Yes, we had Des Rowden from his fishery at Southside.
Yep.
He processed many tens of thousands of what we call pan size.
Yep.
About a foot long. He processed there, and they were going pretty good. The first year we had a break-even situation at the farm, which we didn't think was going to happen for a while with all the costs we had, labour, running the farm, and I hope Des did reasonably well out of it. But when we got too big too quick, and we ended up being partners with Lane Walker Rudkin.
Yep.
That was, fortunately, they had done quite a bit of this, and they said the only way this will work is 50-50. We don't want 60 and you 40, otherwise you think, we've got to do what they say all the bloody time. They're office workers, they don't know what we're doing. And anyway, so they had project managers doing other things.
They were pretty entrepreneurial, weren't they? Lane Walker Rudkin.
Well, that was the years when the government brought out suspensory loans.
Yep.
And at that time, Lane Walker Rudkin saw fit to bring out a big fishing boat from Norway and the family involved. And they were doing actually fishing based on the suspensory loan that was available. And the government set that up so that if you were still running the business 5 years after they approved it, they wrote the loan off.
Yep.
And that was a great thing for the coast.
It worked really well, didn't it?
Yeah, it did help a lot of people.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, this boat, after quite a bit of modification, and the Norwegian family, apparently it didn't quite gel. And so Lane Walker Rudkin decided to send it back to Norway, which they did. Yeah. And they decided at that stage that they also didn't want anything else that was different than other than making pants. And the factory in Hokitika was known as the Pants Factory,
yep.
Lane Walker Rudkin Factory.
And in Westport.
It was known, it was known as the Pants Factory.
That's it.
So anyway, having said that, they decided, well, in conjunction with us, we decided that we couldn't carry on our own. And because I had quite a few big concrete raceways, they were 40 feet long, 8 feet wide, 4 feet deep, circular ponds, which was another story, and it got pretty big. And so the general consensus was, well, we may have to look at making it a public company, which Lane Walker Rudkin followed through.
Yeah.
By that stage, we had agreed with them to put cages in the Marlborough Sounds. We had a license to put sea cages in the Marlborough Sounds.
Wow.
But unfortunately, John Whisker and Jim Galloway and I tried to tell Peter Rudkin he was putting them in the wrong place. He had a friend who had mussel lines, and at so low tide, there wasn't the depth
that
you need underneath
to clear
sediment to clear it.
Yep.
And it wasn't the current. They were in a bay. There wasn't the current there to change the water, change the oxygen, and keep it clean. Anyway, Peter decided that his friend knew better than we did, and that's where he decided he would go. And sadly, that we were proven right. It fell over.
And so, Graham, after it went public, Lane Walker Rudkin basically picked it up and built the sea cages up in the Sounds. What did you do then?
That was just before Val got diagnosed with motor neurones disease in 1985. And so that was, I decided I'm out of here. So I left the salmon farm and sold the motels. I'd finished with the building anyway.
Yep.
And so Val and I went to Christchurch in 1986, Bruce.
Motor neuron disease, terrible, isn't it? And in Hokitika we've got obviously part of Val's family, Terrible.
The Ferguson family had it.
Yeah.
Oh, his wife. But Val had the familial type, and a lot of people don't know what familial really means.
I'm one of them.
They know what hereditary means, and in this case, Val's brother Trevor died with motor neurones disease, only the 2 kids, and they both died at 53. Now, everybody was saying it's got to be hereditary, but no, it is not. It's familial.
What does that mean?
Hereditary means that if either of your parents have got a terminal complaint, and you've got 2 parents, and they've got 2 genes picked up from their parents
Yeah.
for everything in your body.
Yeah.
Now, the motor neurons tell your muscles what to do. Before you've got motor neurons disease, I can say, Graham, wiggle your thumb. Bop, 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 bop. When you've got motor neurons disease, your motor neurons die off, and you say, move your thumb, and nothing happens. And so slowly but surely the body just deteriorates, the muscles are not working, and it's the motor neurons that don't let the muscles do what they normally do, and that's what causes the terminal death.
I did a very moving interview with a young lady called Samara Wright.
Yes, you're related to Val.
Ah,
Yeah, all that Wright family are related to Val.
it was very...
She was Val Wright.
Right.
Right.
Right, oh, I got you. Okay, well...
You got it.
I got it now, yeah. Well, it was really moving. A young mum.
Yeah, it's
And-
tragic. Well, I nursed Val at home until she died.
Yeah.
At home.
Yeah.
And she died at home, and I was so lucky that in those days I had the support of the Nurse Maud ladies, as in Christchurch, and they would come virtually daily.
Gosh.
And if they couldn't come, they'd ring up and say, look, we're very, very sorry, we're overloaded today and there's some off sick or something, whatever. I said, look, we can manage a couple of days without their help. But it was so great to have their help, and that's what allowed me to nurse Val at home.
And Val would have really appreciated that.
She said she did not want to go into a home.
Yeah.
I promised her I wouldn't put her in a home.
Wow. Wow. Oh, you've
Yeah,
gone the extra mile, haven't you?
Bruce, it was probably the hardest thing in my life. I've always been able to build anything,
Yep.
fix anything,
Yep.
but I couldn't do a damn thing to help fix Val. Just couldn't. And that it eats at your bloody mind.
Of course.
And it used to get at me, and the Nurse Maud ladies, you'd come in the morning and say, Graham, you go for a walk for an hour while we're here, you need some exercise. Anything happened to me, we were both in trouble.
And of course, we lost Peter Wright recently.
Yep.
Yeah,
He's another one of the right family.
Yeah, down Haast.
Yeah.
It's a terrible thing. So,
Yeah.
are they any closer to finding a cure?
No treatment, no cure. They've found little bits and pieces, and in America they've got what they call a short-term help. It might help. This has been available since Val was here. That it was about $1,000 a pop, and you take it once a month. Well, it eats into your pocket money.
Yeah, would do. Yeah.
And my advice to all the people, I did the support group all around Christchurch for 14 years on my own after Val died.
Yeah.
And I've got a certificate in there from them making me a life member for what I did, what I think. But
Yeah.
and unless I've had people, Bruce, say, I can just understand, it must have been terrible. They'll never ever know unless they have to do what I did.
Yeah. 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 No,
No, not on my own. There's other people have looked after family at home
Yep.
until they passed on, but you don't hear about it. I'm only telling you because you asked me.
Yeah. No. Look, you're a private man. I appreciate that. Graham, what as we wind this part of and with your consent, I'm going to come back in a month or so because I've got.
Well, I'd look forward to seeing you,
I've
Bruce.
got-
I don't know about this, but
I've
you
got-
can call it any time you like.
But you'll find look, Graham, you're going to find coasters right across New Zealand and and in England and Australia. I mean, the smallest number of members that we have are on the coast. The rest are just spread all around New Zealand.
Yeah.
And you're going to find, you'll get messages, you'll have people saying, you'll be staggered at the feedback you get. And because you're a pretty interesting sort of a bloody guy, really. Which is
an interesting life, a good life.
Yeah. You're
And
very.
I've got another 14 years, Bruce. My father died young, and was it? I can't remember now. But anyway, when he died early, I put my thoughts together, and I said, I'm going to make up a sign and put 69 on it.
Yeah.
And if I get to 69, I'm going to hang it up in the bathroom in the mirror. It becomes 96.
Yeah.
I'm 82 years now, so
See,
I've got 14 left.
You're heading to 96?
I've got 14 years left.
Well, look, you might as well go to 100 because if you go to now, if you go to 100, you get a letter from the Queen.
Oh, the Queen will be right, but I don't want one from Charlie.
Well, do you think we'll get one from Charlie? It might be William. Might be
William will be all right.
Yeah, or
Yeah,
Kate.
yeah.
Oh, Kate, she's lovely. I mean, she
Catherine.
Catherine.
Yeah.
Sorry, I shouldn't be
Yeah.
calling her Kate. I mean, it's almost like we're on a first name basis, isn't it? Is there anything else before we wrap this up, Graham? That we could.
One thing I would like to say to everybody who watches this, I thank you and appreciate what you're doing with all this to keep everybody informed, to keep history together, or it would all be lost. Not for my sake, but for everybody else that you do with this. So, on behalf of everybody else, Bruce, thank you very much.
Graham, I really appreciate that. And look, as I said early on in the day, I do it because I love doing it.
Good.
I just love doing it, and
That's
I get to talk to people like you. You and I, you gave me work when I was 24 years old, and I've never forgotten it. And it's so good to be able to come back. You don't look any different. Very straightforward, black and white, no mucking around.
Yeah.
Do it right. You have no problem. If you muck it up, you'll get you get the message.
Yes.
And nothing's changed. So, coasters, you can watch this series over several weeks. You'll get the date in 2 or 3 days, and it'll be on once a week for around 8 weeks in a row. It'll be on our YouTube channel, and if you type in Graham East a Coaster, now Graham, is it an H or an E? It's an H.
H-A-M.
Yeah, so it's Graham with an H, East a Coaster, and you'll find it. It'll be all fully there on our YouTube channel. It'll go out on Instagram, and a copy of the full interview will go to Graham and his family, and one will be lodged with the Hokitika Museum. So you're going to be able to go online, type in Graham East a Coaster, and you'll be able to sit down and listen to some really interesting stuff. Graham, thank you so much. I've really appreciated it.
Great, Bruce. You too.
Thank you.